How often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants. I am Christine Sine. In this third episode of the Liturgical Rebels, I am in conversation with Scott Erickson, a creative artist and storyteller who shares how he uses his God-given creativity to bring the biblical story to life in fresh and new ways. We explore how he became a prophetic painter and developed a visual vocabulary beyond the cross. Scott discusses his decision to move away from traditional Christian symbols and his focus on creating artwork that invites viewers to unknow the familiar story of the Gospels. He emphasizes the importance of experience, awe and wonder, and the role of art in connecting with the giver of our souls. In today's episode, I'm speaking to Scott Erickson, wonderfully creative artist and storyteller. He's the author of several books on prayer, illustrated by his creative and provocative artwork. His latest book is Say Yes, Discover the Surprising Life Beyond the Death of a Dream, published in 2022. Scott, it's a delight to have you with me today.
Great to be here.
Good. I've followed your work on Instagram for several years now, and I'm also enjoying your Substack posts. And I think, like many people I know, I've reused Honest Advent for the last several Advent seasons. And I continue to find inspiration not only in that book, but the other images that you keep producing as well. From my perspective, you are the quintessential liturgical rebel, someone whose life seems to be deeply impacted by the biblical story, and yet through the use of your God-given creativity, you're able to make this wonderful story come to life in fresh and new ways. And I just love the new ways that you do manage to make it come to life. And I understand that you've always relied on images to help you understand the world around you. Not always easy in an educational system that values words more than images. And as you described it in a recent email to me, in a Protestantism that has no images either. I thought that was great because I grew up with that same problem. And I would stare at the bricks and actually count the bricks because that was kind of the only thing that I had to look at. So I think that your approach really kind of resonates with me. So, Scott, let's start by you telling us a little bit about your life story and how you got into art.
Well, it was something that was always coming out and being invited to. I mean, I was always a doodler. I remember in third grade, a teacher was like, "You're really good at this." My experience in church was the bulletins would just be like covered with images all around them because I would just sit, sometimes laying down on the pew and draw the whole time. And I had some good teachers in ninth grade and in high school who really encouraged me. It was probably it was actually after high school. A family friend that I'd known my whole life, her name's Mary, she invited me to come and live in Europe and be one of her assistants. She was in charge of this European ministry. And me and this other girl were her assistants, and we would travel around with her to all our contacts in Europe. And she would often like preach in these places, and she would have me interpret this, whatever she was going to talk about, and make like a large, just like a drawing on a piece of paper
Uh-huh.
or
How
something.
wonderful.
And then put that up while she would teach. And that was kind of the first invitation to kind of how would you interpret these things visually. And then in college, I studied in art and in education. I made friends with this band who I was talking to. Is this like quartet, all females. They're called Late Tuesday, and they. One time I was talking to one of them, and I was like, "Oh, I went to one of your shows, and I just saw like drawings being made the whole time." And she goes, "You should do that next time." So I started. We
Oh,
did it
wonderful.
once, and we ended up doing a lot. Where I started like making images during their shows in the background, and that. So that, and then because I did that, as I got done with college and moved back to Seattle, this church started inviting me to do this with them, and so I was working with like whoever was teaching and kind of interpreting the stuff, and eventually they gave me like a studio in their attic, and I just said, "Can I paint?" By this time I started painting, and I was like, "Can I just paint every service? I just will
Wow.
be in the corner." And I literally was like in the corner, like there was like the stage, and I was like off in the corner. And it was, look, I didn't grow up. My joke, what's funny to me is like I grew up Lutheran, and my joke is like, we never talked about the Holy Spirit. He's like a bad uncle that doesn't come to holidays anymore, and I did not grow up in a charismatic Holy Spirit community, but I ended up becoming what they would call a prophetic painter for a good
Wow.
decade, where however the Holy Spirit wanted to train me, I just would take dictation. I would be like, "Oh, there's a picture. I think I should make that." And there would be a bit, I learned how to discern what that was. And then I would just make this picture and see what happened. And I ended up, so at the time I was doing that, I was teaching, and I felt this call to, and my question was like, man, if I never try to be an artist, I'll always regret it. And whatever that meant. And so I asked for a few things. I said, I want to be a full-time artist. I want to work at a church as an artist. I want to fight evil, meaning I want to be a part of important things. And I want to go on tour with a band making paintings. And within a couple of years, all of that happened. I started
Wow.
painting at a church. I started doing painting and artwork for World Vision, for raising money for AIDS orphans. A friend of mine invited me on his nationwide tour in a tour bus, and I made paintings during all the shows, and then that led me to like conferences and churches and stuff. And then I eventually worked. Sorry, is this too long?
No, this is great.
I got invited to be an artist in residence at a church in Houston, Texas, and I spent 3 years there, and I made paintings every service. We did 5 services a weekend. I made paintings every service for 3 years, which eventually burned me out. But I was just telling some people this story the other day. Having a consistent weekend visual gig, I had to. It was interesting, like what the Spirit taught me, because I was like, how do you translate all of this theology into a symbol set? And I started developing like a visual vocabulary. Like I remember when the children's minister, who was great, she did all this like art stuff with the kids. She came to me one day and she goes, "Hey, the kids they're paying attention to you. They're watching you, because when we do art projects, they mimic everything you're doing, and they're learning your vocabulary." And that really hit me about this, like, oh yeah, what is our visual vocabulary?
I
We don't
like that
necessarily,
expression.
we don't necessarily think about it that much, as much as like, oh, we have crosses and doves and a cup and a bread. We have some symbols, but how do you discuss, what is the symbol for forgiveness? Is it just a cross? Like the
Yep.
Protestant answer is the cross is the answer for everything. But I had some very unique experience to go, oh, there's actually more that can happen here. And so post that and getting into my own work, there's actually two things I'm not really interested in making, which is Jesus and crosses. Meaning, it took me a long time to move away from the blonde-haired Scandinavian Jesus in the Norwegian church I grew up in. His cousin is the god Thor. It took me a long time to image that, and I'm not interested in like what Jesus looked like. There's some great things about that. That's just not my thing. In crosses, I've done some work on the cross, and I think the cross is an amazing. I was at this church in Florida this last weekend, and they had this huge, 2-story tall cross in their massive sanctuary. And I got up to preach about prayer, and I was like, I like your big cross. And I was like, do you guys know why we have a cross in the room? And I think they were just like, because we're Christians. And I was like, yeah, but the early church didn't feel comfortable with the cross. They didn't accept the cross as a symbol for like 300 years.
Yeah.
Because the cross meant you lose by an empirical force. And they saw their friends and their family members get executed on that. So they weren't quick to take that and make charms about it and put it around their neck. It took a long time to understand that the power of Christ was greater than the power of any military empire. And it's actually a real punk rock move to take a symbol of execution and make it your symbol of hope.
Mm.
And I was like, don't you think it's weird that on every church in the world is an execution device? Like it's very punk rock. And yet we trinketized it and bedazzled it on shoes and coats. But my thing is like the cross is a confusing symbol nowadays because we'll see pictures of Mother Teresa wearing it, and it's in the logo of the KKK. And I think most people go, I don't know, hypocrisy. That's what they think. So those are not the things I lead with. And it's really helpful as a creative to give yourself kind of limitations, because then you go, well, I can't use these obvious things. What else is there anything else I could use? And there's this whole history of artwork, and from indigenous cultures to, Baroque and European, but all over, but people who are translating these things. And so I'm trying to be a part of that, but contextualize it in artwork that's post pop art, post Andy Warhol, post graffiti art, post design work. We're what we make now doesn't need to look like stuff they made in the 1500s, because we're not in the 1500s.
I agree wholeheartedly.
So, Although don't get me wrong, I love Caravaggio. I think Caravaggio is amazing, but I don't want to make pictures of people in tights.
Yes.
So,
well, I think that this is one of the things that I find challenging, is that so often our images of Christianity do come from another era. And we don't have those images that come from today's world. I mean, even talking about the cross, I have questions about whether the cross should be the main image we use for Christianity, because it wasn't the death of Christ, it was the resurrection.
No, resurrection. And, exactly.
Yeah, and I think so many people are stuck at the cross. And I don't, and I think that we kind of perpetuate that through the images that we create. And so, something to think about, Scott, some new images that help us to really get into the resurrection. One of the Advent books I used last year talked about, it was a book called Advent in Narnia. And it talked about how, let me just read it here, that C.S. Lewis makes the gospel unfamiliar again by placing it in a new world. And I think that some of your artwork has that same kind of a feeling for me. It makes the gospels unfamiliar again because you kind of place it in a world that most people don't really identify with. And so we either dismiss it which obviously some people do, or we kind of grab hold of it and we allow it to bring new things into our life. And that's what I see in your artwork. And I wonder if you would like to talk to that a bit. Do you feel that that is something that you bring to people, or is that kind of just something that's unconscious for you?
No, it's very conscious, and I think about it a lot. I grew up in the church. My relatives are ex-pastors and missionaries. I've been deeply ingrained in this culture, and but I think at some point, okay, but here's just some hot takes. It's just I think people are very scared moving away from the church ceremony because they're often not practiced in having to notice God in the world around them, and they rely on a leader or a teacher to point that out from them, but they don't have to practice themselves. And I'm just not interested in talking about the Bible if it's not illuminating something that's going on today. I don't think there's any reason to tell old stories in any tradition unless it helps us understand what's happening to us now. And I actually think Scripture can be a very helpful guide in that way. But I think we've all sat through sermons where the teacher thought they needed to become obsessed about grain measurements and purity rights and stuff, and you're just like, what the hell does this have to do about today? It's making that transition. And so really the invitation is to go, where do you see it happening today? And that's what Honest Advent was, available at bookstores everywhere, like my friend Hillary McBride was like, it's not even really a Christmas book, it's really just a book about human life through the filter of the incarnation story. And I was like, that's exactly what it is. It's not trying to be like on brand with Christmas. It's just going, Jesus incarnated into the world, and we've all incarnated into the world. And what does his incarnation invite us to contemplate about our own incarnation and God's interaction with our incarnation? And so again, kind of with this idea of like symbol sets and stuff, I think artwork has a great way of unknowing the story that you think you already know. I learned this Russian literary term called ostranony. It's like astronomy, but if you hate M's, it's ostranony. And it is the act of making that which is familiar unfamiliar again. It's how to and I started that and when I heard that, I was like, that's exactly what we need to do, and I need to do. And so I've read through the scriptures like 4 times in my life, but as I've over the last decade done it again, I just kind of start with the question, which is, what don't I know about this story?
I like
what am I not seeing here? And Lectio Divina's really helped me. Imaginative prayer. If our listeners are, I'm sure you've taught them, are unfamiliar with imaginative prayer, is simply to read a passage and then sit with it and imagine you're in that scenario and walk through that story in your imagination and invite God to meet you in there. And I've had very profound visions in that practice of seeing. I'm like, oh, I didn't see that. And finding yourself in there. And that's, so those kinds of things. So it's, just always really confronting. And I've learned this from some other artists, just constantly confronting the cliche, especially when you set out to illustrate something. You will start with sometimes magic happens right away, but you start with like a basic idea and you make it. And I always just go, what don't I like about this? What do I feel is cliche? What if I would push this farther? What if I would move this around? And I think you can kind of, in the same way, do that with, why are we reading the sacred text? Is it so we have it memorized and we can use it as a weapon, or are we like trying to find God in the midst of our lives? I think that's what the scriptures are hoping to illustrate for us, that it happened back then just as it's happening right now.
Yes. Well, and part of what I love is that in the midst of that, you really uncover the awe and wonder of the story as well. I mean, this is something I'm kind of passionate about. You know, one of my books was called The Gift of Wonder. And I am more and more recognizing that we need to change our perspectives so that we are immersed in the awe and wonder of the story of God. And again, that's something that I kind of see you doing. And so, you know, is that something that you really experience as you paint and you draw? And how do you feel that that comes into your experience of art?
Yeah, I have it's right above my computer here. I have this. It says take dictation from the silence. I was one of my best friends is a pastor who we just met yesterday because we'll work on each other's sermons together. I'm just like, can I run this by you and we'll talk about it? We were at Planet, and walking on treadmills, and I was like, I don't know, Kurt, I just take dictation from the silence. And he goes, oh, that's going to be your biography title one day. And because it's true, I think my job is at the heart of it is to be a listener. And it's weird when I talk to young artists because I'm like, it's a part of a process. There was definitely a point in my life where I took every job that I ever had come my way. It wasn't that long ago that my wife and I were on food stamps. Like to decide to be an artist is not to, is to choose a thrifty existence.
Yes.
And in the last few years, my wife's business and my business have done really well, and I'm really grateful for that. And as I've discerned, it was never a quick step, but I've been like discerning. The Spirit is going, trust in what's coming to you and make that. So I mostly say no to everything, and because I only have so much time. I have little kids. I don't have oodles of time to do everything. And anytime I've said yes to a project, I usually hate the entire project because I'm like, I wish I would have done this other thing. And I feel like the Spirit said, just trust the other thing. Trust the thing that's coming, and it'll take care of itself. So all that to say is like, I am in a conversation going, what do you want us to see? How can I be useful? That's just the season of my life I'm in, and I'm trusting that process. So it is co-creating. I just got a little, so here's my post-it. I got a little note yesterday about a future project, and I wrote it down, and I was like, and after I'm done with you, I'm going to write it in this like journal that I'm collecting things. Cause I'm like, oh, there is and this is very much a robust, the future thing is kind of, I would never call it this, but kind of an updated iconography for Christianity is kind of my next five-year goal. And so that is just what I've intuited that I should be a part of and be working towards. So, but that, you know what I'm saying? So it is this collaborative thing. It's not me just going, oh, what does the world need? It's really like, what is the conversation that God is inviting me into? What is the journey I've been on? When my and you get this, my book agent, she was like, what's the book you want to make? And I told her, and she goes, that's the book we all want from you. I was like, oh, okay, good. But that is because that's really what I want to do. And it's amazing when I definitely grew up in a kind of culture that was like, your deepest desire is probably against God's will. And that might be true in some sexual senses, but like, no, it turns out like actually what you deeply desire is what
is
actually what God is leading you to. Like, Ignatius talks about this a lot, that your calling, your vocation in the world is actually found in your desires, and it takes some discernment. And it's been it's been almost a couple decades of that, discerning that process in a slow. Anyways, what was your question you even started with? We got into like,
no, that's okay. I was asking you, you introduce us into the awe and wonder of the story of God. And I was wondering about that in terms of, your art is the awe and wonder of the story something that kind of resonates for you? Or, is it just because that's something that resonates for me that I'm asking you about?
Yeah. Um, you, the next kind of project show that I'm working on is about paradox. And I think from what I've read, all the great mystics and teachers say eventually you have to and you land in paradox. And I think I'm interested in that. I have both my boys have incurable eye diseases.
Oh.
I've lost friends at needlessly young ages. I think there's a part of all of this. I'm always interested in what needs to happen in my life that'll make me. I'm like, if this can't hold up to suffering, I just want to know now. I want to be free from any obligation to talk about this and invite others. Like if it's BS, I just want to know now so I can move on and live the rest of my life. And there are versions of Christianity that can't handle the reality of life. But I actually, in the tradition that I've been a part of, I've discovered so many women and men who have gone through immense difficulty and suffering and have written music and created art and have talked about it in a way that is very it just catches my attention versus the easy way of just nihilism and hedonism and just dismissing the whole magic. I mean, there is a lot of evidence every day if you want to build an argument that there's nothing going on, but then there's so many weird and magical things that are happening
every day.
The fact that,
yes.
Like I was talking to somebody and I was just like, the fact that we just don't even know what our consciousness is. Every day we have a touch point for mystery in our own lives where we're like, I know I have a body, but who I am is not this body. It's something deeper and unknown and unmeasurable. And everybody around me is that same magic. And like even I have a simple practice, which is just to find my heartbeat and I go, I'm only here. I'm not in charge of my heartbeat. It's something that happens in me involuntarily. And I'm only here because of something that I'm not in charge of. We're all here because of something we're not in charge of.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever kind of I got to bootstrap my life or I'm holding it all together. It's like, that's a farce. There's so many graces happening. So, and then as a trained spiritual director, the work is to go, where can we look at the graces in your life? And can we allow that benevolence to transform us or help us have the courage to lead us into the things that we know to be deeply meaningful to us that we're neglecting, and that kind of stuff. So for me, I want to live with wonder. And for me, I would say wonder is the experience of not having a narrative in that moment. That's how I would define wonder. Wonder is when you don't know what's happening, or
which is really most of the time.
Which is really most of the time.
Yeah.
Like, what is the sunset? People, and there's an aspect of beauty too. But people, people will go and look at the sunset, and you're like, I understand because of science and astronomy that this is just our local star going below the horizon line, and the light is refracting off the Earth's atmosphere and creating a color spectrum. I understand all that. But how come I'm crying?
Yes.
What is that? How come beauty can so we have science to describe what's happening, but I think we have religion to go, yeah, but why does that make you cry? What does that point to?
That's
the deeper
wonderful
thing in there.
Yeah. I like that. I really like that. I do. One of my favorite images of yours is the internal telephone, which you use in Say Yes. And one of the things you say in that is somehow inside your very being is a kind of portal that allows you to talk directly to God, a door that can open and close. I like to use the metaphor of a telephone. You have a soul telephone that is connected to the giver of your soul. What if we lay down any feeling that it is on us to pass out telephones and instead get curious with everyone we meet about what kind of phone of phone calls they're having. I thought that was just great,
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
have this phone, but it's kind of like, we want to hand out our phones to others, it's like, and
Yeah.
our phones are kind of like, your phone looked like a little old, kind of
like a rotary
obsolete, rotary phone. And I think, the
I
phones
grew
we
up with
want to
one of
hand
those.
out to other people are
Mm-hmm.
probably like that. They're not, they're not in touch with the world as it is today. But and a lot of your artwork really does explore that connection with the giver of our souls. And, so what I really wonder is, what kind of responses do you get as you share the kinds of images you share, and as you kind of try and help people kind of think in these different ways? Are people basically positive, or are they negative? Or shouldn't I ask that? I mean,
no, that's a great question. I do have an odd career, which is, I like to say, like I was on a podcast, and this guy was like, I've never heard of you, but I looked at this. You have a lot of work. And I was like, yeah, I'm in this interesting field where I don't have a lot of competition. And it's also a category that nobody really cares about. Meaning, like, at least in Protestant Christendom, if we talk about like the conference world, who are all the big deals? It's like the pastors, the authors, the nonprofit starters, the bands. There's and in my experience, if I ask, does anybody know a Christian artist? They're like Makoto Fujimura. And I'm like, yeah, he's great. He's a great man. He's been very kind to me and encouraged me. He also makes abstract work, which doesn't really ask you to make a decision on anything. Like, his work is great. I wish I made as much money as him. I just am saying, like, if the only person we know is somebody who I think Makoto Fujimura makes rich people feel like they're in on the joke. So it is kind of like, I'm not really invited to the halls of what's going on. I'm just kind of a tertiary thing. And what's been weird in my career is that when Twitter was around, I saw this one tweet, and it started this whole chain where somebody was like, oh, I was going to this home church, and I was really, like, for the first time, and I was really nervous. And then when I walked in, I saw they had some Scott the Painter work on the wall, and I knew I was in a safe spot. And then it proceeded to all these people say similar experiences, even dates. Like, somebody was like, oh, I was going to go on a date with this guy, and then I saw he had Scott the Painter on his wall. I was like, he's probably okay. And I was like, what is happening? I became like a test sample for people. And it is in these live shows that I do, people come, and then some people stay around and line up and want to talk to me because I'm a deal in some people's minds. And their responses are really humbling. And they're like, you've helped me in my walk. I was deconstructing, but your artwork helped me in that process of coming through to a different spot. You're one of my favorite public theologians. And I'll try to tell the story not too long, because it really hit me this weekend, because I didn't set out to be like a spiritual teacher. I'm not trying to be, I'm pastoral. I care about spiritual formation, but I'm not trying to start a movement, I'm trying to point to the telephone inside of you. But the question that's hit, so what I'm saying, the easy answer is, like, the people who care, and the people who don't care, I never hear from them. I don't get a lot of negative feedback.
Well, that's good.
I'm not like the Bible Project, who has to deal with people like, why does Jesus not have long hair? Like, I don't get any of that stuff.
Well, don't you think, Scott, that, God always works from the margins? This is what I've seen. God doesn't kind of work.
Oh, is that why I'm so lonely? Okay, great.
I think all of us, kind of that are kind of on the edge in a way. I think we feel that loneliness because of the fact that God does work from the outside in rather the inside out. So the ones that are kind of forging the new things of God, I think, are always on that boundary. I mean, Jesus was. I mean, otherwise
Yeah.
Jesus would have been born in Jerusalem
Yes.
to a princely family or something like that. But he was born on the
Yeah.
margins. And
On the
I think
margins.
that, to me, that is kind of, I mean, it's part of the power of your work, is because it is on the margins. And that's why it's impacting people in a way that is really not only changing their lives, but I think is having a ripple effect through the whole of Christendom.
Yeah.
That's my
It's
theory
surprising.
anyway.
It's surprising. Well, I'll tell you really briefly, the amount of people saying things to me in the last few months has made me be like, well, what kind of leader should I be? What I talked to my spiritual director. I was like, I don't know, what kind of leader do I need to be? And it hit me last week. I was like, that's the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
It's an okay question, but what kind of leader should I be is like, what do you all need me to be for you? And when I was telling the story about how I'm even on this podcast today, like how I dedicated myself to a certain kind of work, it wasn't because I was like, what would be a good business plan? I actually, when I made that decision in obscurity, was like, oh, I'm probably never going to be celebrated as an artist because I want to make work about what I love.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Jesus. I love the Christian story. I love God showing up in people's lives and the magic of that. And when I trained in art school, I was told to be a significant artist in the world, you need to end up in a museum and you like Guggenheim, Tate, MoMA, and you definitely won't get there if you want to talk about Jesus positively or in adoration. If you want to poop on the whole thing and make fun of it, great. We'll open the doors for you. But if you want to talk about how you love it, you're out.
Interesting.
And I had to go, I know what I love and I want to talk about, and I want to make stuff about what I love. And that's better and I need to be okay if I just stay in obscurity the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't work out that way. Thousands of people have my artwork in their homes.
Yes.
Thousands of people have my artwork on their skin, which is very surprising.
Yes.
and it hit me this last week, and I was like, oh, asking what kind of leader I need to be is the wrong question. I mean, I think there's some points about what it's not fully wrong. It's just the right question is, are you still encaptured with what you love? Because focusing and spending time with what you love, the artifacts that come off of that is what's going to be helpful for others.
I love that.
It's not about turning around and be like, what do I need to do? It's like, what do you keep pursuing your love? And what comes out of that will be, bread and drink for those who are hungry.
I really like that. That's great.
Yeah.
That's a great note to end on in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I do want to, what are the best ways for people to connect to you? I mean, I know you're on Instagram, you're on Substack. What are the best ways for people to connect to you?
Yeah. Those are good. Instagram's probably where I put any kind of social media effort into, and I answer all DMs. Substack is newish, but putting effort into that because I don't really trust social media anymore. And I think there's a move for a lot of writers and creators to go, I'd like to not have to base my work on an algorithm to care for a community. And so that's going to be a big focus. And a lot of people I know, it actually also came out of somebody was like, I'm getting off social media, but I still want to follow your work. How can I do that? So that became that. And then I do performances around the nation. And so that's a fun time to turn it from screens to dreams, get me face to face. And those are really fun. But those are pretty good places right there. Instagram, Substack. Instagram if you want to see it on social media, Substack if you want these visual meditations in your email box, live events if you want to meet face to face and have a good time. There you go.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you very much.
And this podcast.
Well, thank you, Scott. I've really enjoyed talking to you today. You've given me some new ideas. I've written down some notes. So I think that it's a great way to go. And, I said at the beginning that I thought you were the quintessential liturgical rebel, and now I think you're the rebel leading the charge.
Oh, wow.
In some ways, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I really think that's important. So thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. That's a great compliment. Thank you.
I have been in conversation with Scott Erickson, wonderfully creative artist and storyteller. We explored how he became a prophetic painter and developed a visual vocabulary beyond the cross. Scott discussed his decision to move away from traditional Christian symbols and his focus on creating artwork that invites viewers to unknow the familiar story of the Gospels. For more information about Scott, please check out the show notes or visit him at scottericksonart.com. In the next episode of the Liturgical Rebels, I will be talking with Craig Yingst about block printing as spiritual practice. We will discuss how his attraction to the Psalms, monasticism, and ordinary saints throughout history formed a focus for his prints and how this form of art can draw us closer to God. I am Christine Sine, author of The Gift of Wonder and facilitator of the God Space Light website. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast or follow me on Instagram or Facebook.